Hello, today I thought we'd do some winter trees in watercolour and using masking fluid to give us the impression of some snow on the side of the trees. So this is the masking fluid I'm using. It's a Winsor and Newton one, and basically it's just, if you've not used it before, if you're a beginner to watercolour, it preserves the white of the paper. So you put it on and it's a bit like a rubber. You wait for it to dry and then you can rub it off after you finish your painting, and the white of the paper is still there. Okay, so I've drawn a picture to begin with, just an imaginary woodland scene, a little wall here with a gate going through into the wood and all these trees. Now you can apply masking fluid if you use your own brushes to apply the masking fluid. It doesn't really do your brushes any good. What you can do is pop a little bit of fairy liquid on your brush to begin with, and it makes it much easier to wash the brush afterwards to get it off. Or you can buy a special masking fluid brush like this one. I also use my shapers for putting masking fluid on, which are these little rubbery things you can buy, and you can buy, this is a taper point one and it's a size 0, but you can buy these in all different shapes, and it's basically rubber. And it's, as it says, shaper. It's for sort of moving your paint around, getting into corners and things, making shapes with your paint whilst it's wet on the paper. But I sometimes use it for putting the masking fluid on. Okay, so I'll just begin by thinking about which way the snow's come from. So we'll imagine that the snow has drifted across the paper like this, and I'm going to put it up the sides of these trees. Now I've not drawn every branch in, just drawn the main shapes of the trees. Leave that to taper out, and then perhaps put a few more little imaginary bits of twigs and things in between. And I'll pop some snow on the top of the wall as well, and down the side of the wall where it's perhaps stuck to one or two of those stones there. Just think about where the snow might sit on these branches. And then we've got this branch that's coming out across the gate, and obviously the snow is going to be sitting on top of that one. And sitting on top of the gate there. And in the foreground we'll just put some, as if we've got a few drifts of snow going along. Maybe it's piled up in a corner by the gate. And just use that to make some lines going towards the gate as well. Okay, now the thing is with masking fluid, you must let it completely dry. Don't try and paint on that at all until you're absolutely sure that it's dry. Now that's completely dry, and although it needs to be completely dry, don't leave it on your paper for days on end. I would say 24 hours at the most, really. And also, if you have a poor quality paper, it won't work. So test your paper out before you do a full painting to check that your masking fluid works with that paper. Okay, so that's completely dry, and I'm going to make this quite dark. I'm going to go for a sort of a night sky effect. So we're going to start off with some ultramarine. So you can just go straight over the top of that masking fluid as if it's not there, and wet your paper. And I'm just going to come down as far as my wall at the moment, so we're just going to concentrate on the sky and not worry about the foreground. So just wetting the paper all the way down to the top of the wall, and a little bit behind the gate, because obviously it's going to show through the bars there as well. So you'll see where the water isn't sticking where the masking fluid is. And you can buy masking fluids in different colours if you're struggling to see the masking fluid on your paper. This one's quite nice because it's a little bit yellowy, it's not too white. you can actually buy a blue one, I think, as well. Okay, so I've got that wet and I've got my ultramarine here, and I'm just going to start at the top of the paper and let that come all the way down. Maybe just leave it a bit lighter in the centre here, perhaps that's where the moon's shining through. Okay, and then to go even darker, I'll get a stronger pigment, get a bit more blue on my brush. I'm just going to get my eraser there and prop my paper up a bit so that it's running in this direction and it isn't going to run back up that way. Okay, so you can see how that masking fluid is resisting where those trees are, and I'm going to go a bit darker by adding now some Payne's grey to that mix of ultramarine. You can see I'm using a big brush and not being too delicate about anything, just getting a nice big bold sweeps of colour onto there. And then I think we'll brighten it up a bit with some red or some pink. So some alizerin. Like I said, just make it look like it's a bit of an eveningy sky. And just pop that in randomly. Perhaps some a little bit further down as well. And don't forget, when you're popping all these colours in, that they're all going to dry a lot lighter than they are when you put them on. So if you're thinking it's looking really dark, don't worry about it. But like I say, it's a night sky, so we want it to be quite dark, quite bold. Just bring the water up to the edge of that gate post there to straighten that off, so we've got that nice shape when we, and I'll just, with a damp brush, just bringing that down a bit so that it's, we've not got a harsh line there later when we come to do the foreground and it's all coming forward. Okay, so the wall, if the moon's coming from behind, the moonlight, I'm just going to straighten that edge off there, it's, get some horizontal lines for the sky. That's just with a damp brush, no water on that brush. So what was I saying? Yeah, because the moon's coming from behind, the front of these walls is going to be completely in shadow. And if you imagine it's twilight, they're almost going to be black. So we need a really nice dark colour. So some Payne's grey. Again, we might as well use that ultramarine that we've already got there. And some Payne's grey. And I'll just add to that some brown, just to make it a bit more like the colour of the wall perhaps. So we'll add some burnt sienna to that. And I will just wet the paper first. You see I've got a mucky brush. That doesn't matter because we're going darker than that. Okay, so there's the Payne's grey, that little bit of ultramarine still in it. Perhaps not quite dark enough yet. More pigment. You see how some of the colours are still running into each other, some of those sky colours are running down and it's all merging. That's just making it a bit more interesting. Can you see here where it's gone out? Don't worry about that, just leave it. Maybe bring some of that colour into the foreground as well. So I'll just damp that, that's better. And bring some of that pink forward. So we've got snow on the ground, but because it's dark, it's casting shadows, so all these are shadows in the snow. Okay, now I would leave that now to completely dry. Okay, so that's dry now, and you can see how it's faded quite a bit. It's a lot lighter than it was before. And I'm going to carry on with some of the same colours. I've not cleaned this palette out, I've still got those colours there. And using that really dark colour, just with a bit more of the brown added, to make it a bit warmer, I want to paint in some of these tree shapes. If you start at this side, it's just going to make it a lot easier, you're not dragging your hand over. And get them crisscrossing and get them going to the top of the paper as well. You see how by just holding the brush quite at length and just letting it peter out, you're getting some thinner shapes in there for some twiggy bits. So get a variety of size of line. Okay, I think we'll leave those trees and then we'll come to the foreground, and I'm going to put more of the brown in, but still nice and dark. And just put a bit more detail onto this gate, so there's a bit of a wall there perhaps. Gate post. And we have the snow line on top of the gate. And then put a bit more interest in these walls themselves, just pretend there's a few shadows cast by some of the stones there. But very loose. The thing about going nice and dark is that's going to really show your snow up and get you some nice contrast and make your painting much more interesting. Just a bit of dry brush in the foreground there. Just making sure that there's not gaps there between the end of the trees and the back of the wall, so they're coming up from the back of the wall. Okay, and again we need to leave that to dry. Right, so now that that's dry, this is the tricky part. You must be very gentle taking off this masking fluid, because like I said before, it can tear your paper if you're not sure and you've not used it before. You can use a rubber to take it off. I prefer to use my fingers. It's much gentler, and the other thing is you can feel if you've missed any. As you run your fingers across, you can feel where the masking fluid is, and if you've missed any, it's much easier to get it off than if you're using the rubber. So just very gently start, and can you see how that's like little pieces of rubber that's coming off, and rub all that off. It takes a while, but just be patient. And like I say, keep moving your hand across the paper and feeling where it all is. And if you're wondering about this paper, it's £140 not pressed. So once you think you've got most of it off, just run your hand along and you'll always find that there's bits that you've missed. You can feel them with your hand. So obviously you need clean hands as well for this. And I think that's got it all. So now at this stage, really it's up to you whether you leave it quite loose like that, and actually it looks okay. I'm not sure you'd need to do too much more to it, but if you wanted to make it more detailed and you wanted to be more precise about where things were, you could sort of tidy some edges up a little bit. So you could get your colour that you had before. You know, and you could perhaps, you know, if you wanted to tidy some of the edges of the gate up or something like that, put a bit more shadow in, you could spend a little bit of time doing that. But I actually like it quite as it is, quite loose. And don't forget, if you've put masking fluid where you don't want it and you think, oh, that looks silly there, that white, but you can paint over it. You're back to the ordinary paper there, so you can just paint onto that as you would normally. So if you wanted to just put a few extra twigs in, so that they're crisscrossing across some of the front of that snow as well, it's going to make it look a bit more natural. And you can start fiddling and you could mess around for ages, so it's perhaps best just to leave it when you think you're reasonably happy with it. Okay, so you can see how using the masking fluid just with those 4 colours can give us that nice impression of snow. I've done it quite quickly and quite loosely, and it's made quite a pretty little picture. But of course you could go much more detailed just using the same techniques, but spending a lot more time doing a more accurate drawing, and perhaps doing more of a foreground. But I think it's quite nice to leave it loose. So let me know how you get on and what you think. There's all sorts of things you can use masking fluid for. I use it a lot when I'm painting animals. I cover their eye up with some masking fluid so that as I'm working on the rest of the painting, I'm not going over that area where I need detail. Then I take the masking fluid off and paint the eye in at the last minute. Don't forget, if you're not happy with where you've put the masking fluid and you don't want the white there anymore, you can paint over it. Okay, so let me know how you get on. Ask any questions in the comments and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon.